fit-for-purpose United Nations is urgently needed, one that possesses the legitimacy and efficacy in dealing with threats to international peace and security.
The United Nations office in Nairobi, as the only UN headquarters office in the Global South, has seen an increasing number of UN offices seeking to relocate their staff to Nairobi.
Member countries together at the level of, at ministerial level. And this is the body that is charged with the responsibility of driving the housing and urbanization agenda within the context of sustainable development goals.
The importance of Nairobi, the importance that multilateralism, Kenya plays in the role of multilateralism, and that is really what this conference is about, strengthening all about sustainable urbanization, climate change, the climate crisis that we are dealing with, all of them together.
So I can only talk about what I know about it.
Okay.
I've talked to people who were there, including Ambassador Dala. If you're able to speak to him, that would be very good.
Okay.
I don't know whether he's still in town. He was in town last week.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. But the others have gone, like Ambassador, I think, Okayo. They are no longer there. Odero Joey are no longer there. So Margaret Kenyatta no longer there. She was the mayor of Nairobi at that time. And who else? And then, of course, Jomo Kenyatta himself as president. He's no longer there.
Yeah.
But the point is this. The negotiations to have Habitat hosted by Kenya came from the discussions of hosting a UNEP in Kenya. And the developing countries thought it would be a good idea to have the two agencies together, which I think made a lot of sense because the environment and the habitat more or less go hand in hand. And it was not an easy thing to negotiate because the developed countries themselves wanted to have it. And then other countries in the developing world, in Asia particularly, also wanted to have it. India was one. Some in Latin America wanted to have it. But the argument was that it is much better to have the two agencies together. So the negotiations were quite protracted in New York. Permanent rep then, Dero Joey, must be congratulated, wherever he is, God bless his soul, must be congratulated for spearheading those negotiations. But there was, the Kenya government itself was wholly involved in it. They had realized the importance as soon as UNEP was allowed to be hosted in Kenya. And they realized that Kenya would make an impact on global politics and also on environmental diplomacy as a result of having the two together. So the negotiations went quite smoothly, much more smoothly than had been the case with the UNEP. Yeah.
So in your view, what do you think has been the significance or the benefit of having Habitat here in Kenya?
Serious benefits. I think the country won international recognition as a result of hosting the fourth headquarters of the United Nations. Because it has now grown into the fourth headquarters, I think, and probably even bigger than Vienna, I suspect, at the moment. But the benefits are this. One, the international civil servants based in Nairobi make a huge contribution in terms of foreign exchange. Kenya earns international respect for hosting the only fourth headquarters of the United Nations in a developing country. And I think there are no parallels in terms of how Kenya has benefited as such regarding this particular element of hosting both UNEP and Habitat. And finally, I think we are able to contribute to the climate agenda as well as Habitat agenda in terms of how urban development can occur with proper housing for its population, wherever it is. And therefore, we address the issues of human settlement in terms of national policies, where we are trying to address imbalances in the economy.
Yeah. Okay. And Balozi, according to you, do you have like any memory that stands out in terms of the journey? You know how Habitat has moved over there from where we began to where we are right now. Is there anything that stands out for you?
Yes, the point I think we need to take into account is how Kenya was able to attract interest from the rest of the world. We had a divided world during the Cold War, East and the West, and both had competing interests. How we were able to bring them together to support Kenya's position. I think the policy of a non-alignment gives us credit to that, because we were able to utilize the numbers in the South-South cooperation, but also benefit from the non-aligned policy, because we were able to pick the best from the West as well as the best from the East and make it our own. And as a result, we developed what you can call moderate foreign policy, which attracted both sides of the political divide internationally. To me, that stands out very, very clearly. Number two, it is how we were able to marshal South-South cooperation to have the developing countries support that policy, because it was not an easy thing. And we did it without antagonizing the West and the East, and they still supported us from that point of view. Even as late as when I was the PS in Foreign Affairs in 2005, 2006, there were efforts to try and get away the mandate of both Habitat and UNEP away from Nairobi. They would leave the shells, the buildings here, but the mandate itself would go elsewhere. And Germany was started as one that wanted to utilize the offices that it left in Bonn to Berlin to house those agencies. But we fought it out. And I remember there was the former director of UNEP, I think, Dr. Toffa. He wrote directly to President Kibaki seeking an appointment, bypassing Foreign Affairs.
Okay.
Yeah. So they got a letter, and the controller called me and said, "Are you aware about this? There's a meeting for the president with Director Toffa." I said, "No, I'm not aware." So they sent me a copy, and they said, "Don't give him an appointment until we have given you a brief on what is happening." So Foreign Affairs now started doing a brief, and we had to do it in 1 hour. The matter came up at about 5 o'clock. He sought the appointment at 9 o'clock the following morning. He said, "Don't give him the appointment until we give the president a brief." And by 7:30, I had given a brief. I went personally with it to State House. So I sat with the president and explained what was happening. The minister was not even in town. And I just informed the minister what was happening. It was Ali Mwekwere at that time, Minister of Foreign Affairs. So the president was prepared when he met Toffa a day after, not the following day as he wanted, because he wanted to bypass Foreign Affairs so that the president could overrule whatever else we had in mind. But the important thing I'm trying to say is that Kibaki was willing to listen to the opinion of his experts. And I think that's how our system works, because the system understands the historical background of what has happened. And if he had just met Toffa at that particular time, it would have been difficult. And you see, Toffa was representing both Habitat and UNEP in those negotiations. So what happened? We agreed, the complaints were three. One was bad roads, insecurity, and the taxes, the diplomatic privileges. So we addressed those. The president directed for the roads to be done, and the roads in Nairobi were improved greatly. The road linking Ruaka Road to UNEP headquarters was constructed as a result of that. The establishment of a diplomatic police was established as a result of that. And then we formed a liaison committee. I don't know whether it is still in place, between the United Nations Organization and the ministry, but it encompassed all diplomatic missions. So again, we were able to address that problem and remove the obstacles that were hindering the presence of habitat as well as UNEP in Nairobi. And to me, those stand out. We have to be vigilant. That's the basic point. It will be a disaster for this country if we lose both habitat and UNEP. We may have it in name, but we don't need to leave the mandate, because the meetings that take place here are important for our image internationally. And they also have the economy, because people coming in money and they pour in money into the economy. That's good. Apart from also helping us be understood by our competitors. And we have not had a situation where we threaten the existence of the two institutions in Nairobi, and I hope that continues. So to me, that is the plea to the government, because they have the machinery and they have the capacity to deal with the problems effectively.
Sure.
We tend to conduct our diplomacy in secrecy. It is not necessary. We need to let the public know what we are doing. What is it that has made other countries respect Kenya and allow it to host habitat, to host UNEP? Yeah, they are very important agencies of the United Nations.
Sure.
So that to me, that is something that needs to come out in the public. I don't know how you're going to do it. It's the ministry practically, but I think yourselves also.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I must let you know, on behalf of our PR, she's very passionate about. She's really tried to raise the portfolio, even our social media traffic, in regards to the mission. So that is something I'm sure she'd welcome very much. Yes.
Yeah, we those of us who are retired,
Yes.
would like to contribute to this debate.
Yes.
Kenya is our country.
Sure.
We don't have another country.
Yeah.
Kenya is our country.
Yeah.
In other countries, retired diplomats form the resource base for the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Here we haven't even started doing that.
Yeah.
And then it's a pity. I've been trying to engage the ministry. And even my former colleagues have asked me to chair the former ambassadors group. But I'm still seeking to see the PS, the CS, whatever. They haven't granted me the opportunity. And I'm just going to give up and then go home to the village.
You can't let all that knowledge there. We need to make proper use of all.
No, but you see, if the system also wants to make use of us, they can structure certain things that we are able to do. Because my colleagues, former ambassadors, are willing.
Yeah.
They're willing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the ministry has to take the initiative.
Yeah, I know. I remember during the retreat we had that I was with you at Naivasha during the environment.
Yes.
Where the director for foreign service said that she will have curriculums that involve and incorporate the retired ambassadors.
Nothing has happened from that.
Because really, you are the resource persons when it comes to diplomacy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nothing has happened. So we still seated here. I've been retired for 19 years. So I haven't lost any bit of my information. No.
Yeah.
No.
Sure.
But it's because personally I'm interested in writing and in reading and keeping up with the events. Yeah. I don't know about my other colleagues. Yes.
Its body was being established in 1976 when they had the first conference in Montreal. And then the UN General Assembly decided to designate it in 1978-79 to be a subsidiary body of the United Nations General Assembly, and designated to be as UN Habitat. So it moved to Kenya. Therefore, the first establishment of UN permanent mission for Kenya to UN Habitat was 1979. It was domiciled in Ongeri. And I think you need to know the politics that they were around at that time was there was so much concerted effort to move away the UNEP headquarters from Nairobi to some other stations in Europe, and I found myself at the center of this war. I call it a war because it was a war. One of the reasons they were giving is that in Nairobi the communication system was very poor. It took you a whole day to contact an officer from New York to Nairobi because they did not have the fiber optic cable. That prompted me then to negotiate with the government of Kenya, the president. I actually had an access to President Moi, and who agreed to be able to lay down a fiber optic cable from the Kenya Post Office in Kenyatta Avenue, right all the way to Gigiri. So that problem was resolved. And that was the first beginning of the fight in wanting to transfer this UN headquarters, UNEP headquarters to Europe. And obviously that affected UN Habitat, because if UNEP was going to be transferred, then consequently UN Habitat would have also been suffered the same fate. So while fighting for UNEP to be the headquarters of Nairobi, it was one of those moments that it took a lot of energy and negotiations in various fora where these matters came up. And then there was the second element, one of the obstacles they created, that they needed security was not adequate in Nairobi. If you remember, that's when again we moved as a Kenya government to establish the diplomatic police security in Gigiri. So that settled the matter. So from communication to security, so that settled the matter, and therefore we all thrive together. Now coming to UN Habitat, let me also mention here that one of the things that we started after strengthening UN Habitat, we needed to universalization, make it a universal body. It was only a member, I think the membership at that time was either 58 or 68, can't remember quite correctly. And therefore they were arguing that this cannot be a center in itself. So one of the things that I went about negotiating was strengthening the UNEP in Nairobi, so that element of it can be as one of the major bodies, one of the headquarters in Nairobi. And I remember going from one headquarter to another, from where the UN bodies were. They wanted to move it to Geneva. Some were suggesting to move it to Spain. So we argued, and we said, look, Kenya is the only south of Sahara African country that where the UN body is. There's no other any UN body elsewhere in the third world except in Kenya. There were suggestions to move it to Southeast Asia. We said, no, that's not possible. So we are the only headquarters in Nairobi, and we need to maintain that as the headquarters in Nairobi. And if UNEP was moved, that would have affected UN Habitat as well. So when we went around strengthening UN Habitat, I mean strengthening UNEP in Nairobi was a major topic in the United Nations. And I went to New York several times. I can't remember. I was literally in the flight always to New York or to Geneva or to Austria, where the atomic energy is, or some other headquarters, in trying to, every meeting where the UN was meeting in respect to UNEP, I was there. And I traveled, and I thank the Kenya government, they enabled me to travel to be able to strengthen this. So, as fate will have it, we finally succeeded in getting this strengthening of UNEP in Nairobi. That went, and I'm giving this prelude because we went through the same motion in trying to strengthen trying to strengthen UN Habitat as well, make it a universal body, because that was the basis of those negotiations. So as luck will have it, Rio plus 20, I was then the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and I went the shuttle diplomacy in wanting to make UNEP a universal body, domiciled in Nairobi, Kenya. And we succeeded in Rio plus 20 conference declaration. Now coming back to UN Habitat, you remember, as I told you, there was the first conference in 1976 in Montreal. It was a biennial, they were meeting biennially. The next one was 1996 in, I think, Istanbul. And then 76, sorry. No, from 76, then 96, and then 2016, we went to Quito, Ecuador. I almost died there.
Oh.
Oh yes, oh yes. The height, the altitude hit me so hard.
Oh.
When we were negotiating this. So in order to be able to have this third assembly in Quito, I remember it was between 14th or 16th to 20th of October in Quito, in Ecuador. There were what we call preparatory meetings. They were called prepcoms. Prepcoms were being held in various towns and cities. But there was a first prepcom. The second one was in Indonesia, which I attended both the first and the second one. And then, of course, the third one was in Nairobi. So we went through that motion. The whole idea was to prepare a new paradigm shift on a new urban agenda. You remember when UN Habitat was established as human settlement. And that was the only thing that was then available at that time. But now, over a period of time, they realized that human settlements really constituted people living in a given locality and forming small towns and forming huge towns, and that's where the impact of environment. So the symbiosis between UNEP and UN Habitat was clearly seen. That with the human settlements, and when they looked at the historical profile of population movements, it was noticed that more and more people were moving towards the urban center. So urbanization became a reality. And that was projected to the future, that would be the biggest problem unless handled. And with the rapid urbanization, there was the issue of informal settlements. In fact, when you look at the population profiles and dynamics in towns and cities, those who are staying in informal settlements, those who are staying in places that are very poor facilities, like housing, sanitation, water, on all roads, the infrastructure, the planning was extremely poor. And therefore the impact on the environment was telling. So that's where you are the highest population, the first instance, with very poor conditions, and therefore destroying the environment. The energy consumption was very high also in these areas, and therefore you needed to manage energy consumption in these places on how to be able to bring up the populations to have a decent living, an acceptable living. So it was felt the waste disposal management system was also very poor. That's how the new urban agenda came in. That the future was towards urbanization. The future indicated in some scientific research which was done that about 4.3% of the growth occurred in the towns and cities. The movement from urban, from rural to urban was very rapid. And therefore it was now known that the area to tackle was the urban centers. What was it entailed in urban centers? The issue of planning. Apart from the issue of planning, the development of that urban center. Apart from the development, the spatial planning, because the way the planning was done initially was in a very haphazard way. People would just go and locate buildings anywhere. And therefore, followed with the spatial planning, of course, was the question of infrastructure. Followed by the open spaces and the walkways and the drainage system and the management of solid waste management. So these were the twin or the ingredients that required that we now needed to have a new agenda. And that's why it was designated the new urban agenda. That's where the mobilization was. It was also realized the financing of municipalities, the local authorities, the municipalities, was very important and very critical in ensuring that there is vibrancy in development in these regions. But how do you plan? How do you finance areas where you have not done proper spatial planning? The value of land was enhanced because once you invoke spatial planning, the value of land was not enhanced. Instead of everybody used to scramble for the first row of the in front of the road frontage, but you could equally make it more valuable, the second row, the third row, so long as you did a very effective spatial planning. And we now realize that was the way to go. So what happened is that apart from this population flow towards the cities and towns, it was also realized that the energy consumption was very high. Energy consumption was very high. Therefore, you needed to develop some energy and how to use the waste disposal to be able to harness energy. In the case of Nairobi, we had the JICA, the Japanese government, were interested in dealing with the great mounds of garbage in the Eastlands. We almost started that. I don't know where it is reached now, where they advanced it to. That was never there. And the next other thing that we needed to do was to develop the infrastructure supported by World Bank in these areas, in informal settlements. But coming back to Kenya, some of the projects that we did were the planning, municipal support. There were more than 20, 30 projects that we had developed in Kenya that were getting direct support from UN Habitat. Apart from that, the infrastructure, slum upgrading, which we did in Kibera and some other areas that I cannot remember at the moment. But coming back now to the actual negotiation. So this PrepCom, I think that's where you're interested in. This PrepCom, after the boardroom dramas, I remember the PrepCom in New York that we carried out. We could not leave the room. We could not leave the room because Kenya was considered as an opinion leader in Africa. Just as Brazil was considered as another major opinion leader in Southern America. and Asia, of course, was India. So anything that Kenya said was very important because, one, UN Habitat was domiciled in Kenya. Two, the African countries looked at us as a country that can be able to provide leadership. And then by inference, I was the man on the spot as Kenya's ambassador to UN Habitat. So we could not get out because what was happening is that there was a strong wave that came through saying that Kenya cannot host a second African. Should this go to the universal way, Kenya cannot hold a universal body again in Africa. This must go somewhere else. Number two, the governance structure of UN Habitat was very weak because of its membership. The membership was only 58. We were only 58 permanent representatives here in Gakenia. And therefore, the rest of the world argued, those who were not represented here, because they did not have their mission here, they said that we cannot allow another UN body because it was going to be very costly for them to set up another permanent representative to come and represent them in Nairobi here. They would rather have it in New York or where there is already an existing UN bodies. That was the war. That's one of the war. So therefore, we could not move from the room because anytime they could sneak in a resolution that would be against our interests. So what we did, we worked in turns, officers who are with me and from the Kenya mission in New York. So, and I will be there in the morning session, part of the afternoon, I'll go and rest a bit and come at night. And the whole night we'll be there again. Then I'll go and have breakfast. And I remember one session went from Wednesday to Saturday morning. By the time we were coming back, I was sick. Literally sick of sleep. Not of any major illness, but sick of sleep. So we managed to tide over this process. We said we can then be able to create an executive body. Apart from the Committee of Permanent Representatives, who are 58, you can now create an executive body of 36 members, which then will be able to oversight the UN Habitat. We are talking about the oversight of UN Habitat and the governance structures of UN Habitat. So there was a three-tier system: the CPR, the executive body, then of course the overall General Assembly, the highest body. This is the resolution that we needed to pass through in these negotiations, in this PrepCom. And this is the one which brought us a lot of problems, a lot of difficulties. But how can you do it? And how can one country have two bodies? So we succeeded. When we went to Malaysia, Soraya, and I remember we went to Soraya, it was the same story, but we were then using we managed to, within the group of 77, including China, we managed to convince Brazil, who were not with us initially, we managed to convince Brazil to go along with us instead of splitting the group of 77. And you had to use a lot of diplomatic skills to be able to achieve that objective. So we managed to keep it going, keep the pressure going until we PrepCom 3, which then ended up in the General Assembly in Quito. So what did we achieve in Quito? One, for the first time, when that new urban agenda was negotiated, and there was an array of various things. Apart from the new urban agenda, there were more than 100 I think, and 74 resolutions that were passed in Quito, New Urban Agenda. A record time for any assembly to pass 174, 76 odd. I think 76 odd. No, 192, I think. I can remember. Yes, 192. Anyway, it was 192 or 194. 194 resolutions passed in that place. So that's one achievement. And it covered the whole array of New Urban Agenda. Covered about what I've already told you.
Yes.
And then it also covered the question of governance structure. Reinforced the three-tier system of governance for UN Habitat. And then the number of people who acceded and signed for the New Urban Agenda was 167. So from 58, 167. Today, I think you have 193.
93,
92 or 93, I don't know.
93.
Yes. So that was a big milestone that we took you through. And for us, that was a big achievement as a country. The second achievement was that when it came to the question of universality of the body of Kenya, I think one of the things that I noted somewhere else. In that resolution 174, reaffirmed Kenya. 174 reaffirmed Kenya as the headquarters of UN Habitat. So as far as I was concerned, objective and mission achieved.
Yes.
That's the basis upon which this New Urban Agenda came in. What are the advantages of the New Urban Agenda? We now have two bodies here, UN Habitat and UNEP. Before then, one of the areas I was fully involved in negotiating during the strengthening of UNEP was the creation of UNON. You know, all other services were either concentrated in New York or in Geneva. So we wanted another body that would look after these two bodies that were now here. And I negotiated that when I was UNEP. So we brought in UNEP, UNON. And so UNON is now a subsidiary body which has similar functions like other subsidiary bodies, like other bodies in either in New York, the headquarters, or in Geneva. So now Nairobi is fully entrenched with the UNON. What does it mean? You have more than 5,000 people employed in this country. You can see the kind of foreign exchange that is coming here. You can see the purchasing power. And then the representation of the diplomatic corps in this country. It's a huge growth. Secondly, what does that mean? New Urban Agenda, UN Habitat being strengthened as a body here. It means the future investment and the flow of resources will be towards a New Urban Agenda. Properly handled, these were the biggest investments, both from the private sector and from the public sector will go. So we are talking about huge capacities. We are talking about huge gains in housing, affordable housing, in an environmental issue, because we realized that human settlement contributed heavily to environmental degradation. Therefore, we have an opportunity to turn a misfortune into a fortune as a country. And we just need to handle it right and well. And I think heavy investments are going to flow this way. The international private sector would want to invest in energy, turning the amounts of garbage into energy, green energy. The investment in development in housing. What you see going on, affordable housing, was one of the major agenda that was achieved in the urban agenda. That's the only one which will lift people out of poverty levels, because the inequalities that exist between the have and the have-nots are very huge. And therefore, to be able to level it out, and that's what the United Nations stands for. Leave no one behind. Therefore, that huge opportunity is there, and we can exploit it to the maximum as a country. We are at a vantage position that we can exploit this position very well and very successfully. And I can also say that one of the things I met is that our missions, both in UN Habitat and UNEP Nairobi here, should be strengthened. Our own Kenyan mission, because there will be a lot of activities going on, and a lot of resources should be put to these missions to be able to achieve that objective.
There's a wow, that's a very interesting and comprehensive, detailed story of our journey here on UN Habitat. Now, so Kenya's engagement with UN Habitat has not only been on legislative matters. So the first World Urban Forum, WOOF, was first held in Nairobi. We had a forum held in Nairobi. So one of the key outcomes of that meeting was our Kenya's first national housing policy. I don't know, and of course, which it has been revised and improved over the years. I don't know whether you have any comments on that.
Yes, the housing policy was one of the major areas that was covered. If you remember, that's how the housing department was created as a state department to cater for this new element. And you remember when, as an ambassador for UN Habitat, for the first time, the President of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta, when we talked to him, gave $1 million to support the UN Habitat activities in Nairobi and elsewhere, and within the UN Habitat Secretariat. And this was very well received. For the first time, a developing country was able to give support to a UN body. And the housing program was meant to do the slum upgrading programs. That's one of the first elements that was being done. And indeed, UN Habitat was involved. If you look at the Kibera, the one, the Kibera near Kemri, that slum upgrading program was done by the UN Habitat. And there were many other programs that were lined up to be done. And the housing policy was born out of the realization that if you look at the demographic figures in Kenya, there is a very vast movement of people from rural to urban in search of employment. And therefore it was felt that instead of getting these populations moving to Nairobi, one of the policies that we must make in this rural urban housing scheme or program was to decentralize it. Now that we have a new constitution, we have county governments, and therefore these housing schemes must be domiciled in all the various counties. And if you've noticed, even our president today, President Dr. William Ruto, is focusing on developing the housing sector at the county levels. And therefore that policy is working now. because that was the whole aim, that decongest Nairobi, because everybody was coming to Nairobi for in search of employment. And therefore we had a robust, very clear housing policy, then it will be able to decongest the housing problems into the rural areas. And eventually, when this succeeds, it cannot not only be at the county headquarters, but it can also be at the sub-county levels, the local authorities, at the local urban centers. If you notice the new urban agenda, in all the resolutions, there's an acknowledgement of the national government, the local governments, the sub-national level, the sub-county level, and at the locational level. There's an acknowledgement in that resolution. It's one of the resolutions that was passed in that one. Therefore, we are in tandem with the new urban agenda resolutions that were passed, which were also, again, adopted by the General Assembly, which I attended immediately after that in December. We went back to New York, and we were able to adopt it in the General Assembly. That's why you are having the third assembly coming to Kenya from next week.
Yes, from next week from 5th to 9th.
Yeah?
From 5th to 9th.
5th to 9th.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Look at the entire population coming to Kenya. The accommodation is going to be full.
Yeah.
And we did some samples in marketplaces. UN Habitat was able to, UN Habitat North Kenya, UN Habitat body was able to do some markets in Kenya. I remember I did some markets in Homa Bay. We did some markets in various places in Kenya, where they were showing how you do a very efficient market with all the considerations of planning, waste disposal, water, sewage management, and health facilities, and also the social environment around that region, that area. So it's something very exciting.
Yeah.
For me, if you ask me which is the future is in the new urban agenda.
The new urban agenda is actually heading in
That's the one which is going to leverage resources from the international community. Currently, UN Habitat has enough money from so-called well-wishers. But the UN budget to UN Habitat is still low. And I think that's a new area that Ambassador Jean Kimani should look at and fight very hard alongside with our colleagues to ensure that there's an increased budget allocation to UN body here, now UN Habitat, which is carrying the UN urban agenda. And that mandate was given to it by the Quito Declaration, supported by UN Assembly.
All right, Balozi, as last question, even as we conclude, now focusing on the upcoming assembly, of course, we have a theme that is focused around urban, that is focused around sustainable, the sustainable agenda, so to speak. And of course, the themes are also around urban climate action, financing, localization of SDGs, we've spoken about housing. So in your own words, like just as a parting shot, what would you have to say?
You remember, if you look at the SDGs, this is a successor of MDGs. And if you look at the SDG 11, if I remember, it talks about the new urban agenda, the cities, and other places. And indeed, if you examine all other SDGs, whether you are talking SDG 10, I think 16 or 17, they're all revolving around the human habitation,
Yes.
human settlements, equality, and leave no one behind, gender considerations. They are all within the SDGs.
Yeah.
Therefore, if new urban agenda is handled very well, it fulfills the mandate of SDGs. By 2030, we should see a complete change in the dynamics. And one area that is so important, I'd almost forgotten, and so critical, is that the rapid urbanization is happening in Africa.
Yes, it is.
That's where rapid urbanization is happening. And therefore we need to take stock of that. That's where the huge, and we are the people who generate the least in environmental degradation.
True.
Are you seeing?
The
And
disparity.
therefore you must bring in those investments in order to safeguard the environmental degradation, giving also rise to the development of various cities and towns and places. And therefore this assembly coming here is a wake-up call for African states, for Africa, to start moving the new urban agenda forward as their baby. Because that's where they're going to leverage, properly done, with proper legislation, with proper planning, with proper financing packages. You are going to get a lot of investments, both from the private sector and also from the donor countries, to be able to make this massive movement so that we don't fall. Otherwise, our towns and cities will dilapidate into slums, and these are very inefficient in controlling the environment. The environment is the talk of the day. Whether you are in Kenya or in Istanbul or in New York or in Ecuador, that's the talk of the day. That's where everybody is going. And we have a unique position as Africa to stand tall.
Wow. Thank you, Balozi. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all that history and knowledge with us. We really look forward to an opportunity where we are not rushed and we can invite you to the mission and just sit and unpack all those good memories. And
Those are memories. In fact, I was thinking of writing a book.
You should. You should. This is something that you need to leave somewhere behind. Yes.